Welcome back to Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. On February 18th, Thune discussed Hamas releasing Israeli hostages, inflation lingering from President Biden's term, and a pending nomination. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President, before I begin, I want to note that this week marks the 500th day of captivity for those hostages still imprisoned by Hamas. 500 days. Well more than a year deprived of family, home, loved ones, freedom. It is imperative that the rest of the hostages be returned as soon as possible and that the remains of those killed be returned with dignity so that their families may have closure. And I'm grateful that the Trump administration is making this a priority. My prayers today are with all those still suffering in captivity and with their families. Mr. President, it only took 4 years, just 4 years, for the Democrat leader to become concerned about inflation. Shocking. Last week, the Democrat leader came down to the floor multiple times to complain about January's inflation numbers. Inflation numbers that he blamed on, get this, President Trump. That's right. I guess it didn't occur to the Democrat leader that it was actually President Biden who was president for most of January, up until January 20th, and by the way, for the past 4 years. So I guess, what are you going to do? You got to have something to talk about. But it was fascinating, Mr. President, to hear the leader complain about inflation being at 3%. Inflation was over 3% more than 2 straight years during the Biden administration. And I might add, mostly way over 3%, like 7, 8, 9%. And I'm trying and failing to remember the Democrat leader expressing even half this outrage. By the end of the Biden administration, a typical family had to pay, get this, $13,000 more per year to maintain the same standard of living that it enjoyed when President Biden took office. $13,000 more per year as a result of Biden inflation. And I'd be very surprised if the Democrat leader came to the floor to highlight that fact even once. I think we all know the answer to that. But I'm forgetting, Mr. President, the rules are different for Democrats. If you're a Democrat, it's perfectly fine and not at all hypocritical to plan to abolish the filibuster should you gain a majority in the Senate, but to use it regularly when you do not. It's perfectly fine and not at all hypocritical to convey outrage about a Republican president daring to use executive power, even if the prior Democrat administration used it profusely. And apparently it's perfectly fine and not at all hypocritical to condemn a Republican president for a 3% inflation number, even if he wasn't actually president over most of the month in question, the month of January, while ignoring the raging inflation crisis that characterized a large chunk of the prior Democrat administration. One rule for me, another for thee. That, apparently, is the Democrat motto. But, Mr. President, I guess I should have some sympathy. Recent headlines have described Democrats as dejected, in disarray, and I guess they have to make some kind of messaging attempt, however weak and ill-founded. But I have to say, Mr. President, the hypocrisy is really something to behold. Mr. President, later today, the Senate will vote on the nomination of Howard Lutnick, President Trump's nominee to be Secretary of Commerce. The Secretary of Commerce has an important job. He or she is charged with promoting American industry at home and abroad and keeping our economy competitive both now and into the future. And I'm glad that President Trump has chosen an outcome-driven leader like Howard Lutnick for such an important post. Mr. Lutnick is a successful businessman who has spent 4 decades building up Cantor Fitzgerald, the firm that hired him after college. He's an inventor whose name appears on over 800 patents and patent applications around the world. And he's someone who's not only passionate about business, but who cares deeply about people. But Mr. President, Howard Lutnick's greatest business achievement is not building his own success or building up a company. It's rebuilding Cantor Fitzgerald over the last 24 years. Because Cantor Fitzgerald occupied the 101st through 105th floors of the World Trade Center North Tower. On September the 11th, 2001, every single employee who was in the office died. 658 people, including Howard's brother. It was unclear whether the firm could go on after losing 2/3 of its New York staff. So Howard Lutnick offered the surviving employees a choice. They could either go to 20 funerals a day for the next month, or they could work harder than ever to rebuild the company to take care of the families of those who had died. They agreed to donate 1/4 of their salaries to the 658 families of their colleagues with no limit and no expectation they would ever be paid back. And over the next 5 years, the firm and its employees gave those families $180 million. In 2008, Howard Lutnick made sure each employee got back double what they had been given, or what they had given. And to this day, each September 11th is Charity Day at Cantor Fitzgerald, meaning every dollar of revenue the firm makes that day is donated in memory of those that they lost on September 11, 2001. Mr. President, Howard Lutnick's story is inspiring. It's a lesson in resilience, in determination, in the American spirit. And it demonstrates the type of person Howard Lutnick is and the type of public servant that he'll be. I know Mr. Lutnick is looking forward to taking on the challenges and seizing the opportunities the next few years will bring. As he said in his hearing, he believes, and I quote, "America is in a place to teach the world and to show the world what leadership is like, what a great economy is like, what taking care of Americans is like," end quote. Mr. President, I think we can all agree that we have the capacity to do these things. We can continue to lead the world in innovation. We can continue to unlock new economic possibilities and new opportunities. And we can make life better for the American people. And I'm pleased that Mr. Lutnick will be bringing a get-it-done approach to the Department of Commerce. As a member of the Senate Commerce Committee who has worked on technology issues for many years, I'm particularly pleased that Mr. Lutnick intends to leverage America's leadership in the technologies that are shaping the future. He's pledged to get his department moving on spectrum again, which is critical for next-generation technologies and competing with adversaries like China. In his first term, President Trump took spectrum seriously and opened up more megahertz for commercial use. But the Biden administration did little to nothing on spectrum. It merely released a national spectrum strategy that called for a number of studies, but committed to freeing up 0 megahertz of spectrum. I'm glad that spectrum will get the attention it deserves in a Trump administration. Broadband expansion is another priority that will require action. The $42 billion BEAD program was created more than 3 years ago, yet it has still not connected a single household to the internet. Why? Because the Biden administration overloaded it with conditions that made it unworkable for a lot of telecoms. Things like climate conditions for subcontractors, rate regulation, and union labor requirements, none of which, I might add, were in the law. Mr. Lutnick has pledged to finally get this program off the ground and spend that money only on actual broadband infrastructure. And as we compete to be the leader in artificial intelligence, Mr. Lutnick agrees that we should use the tried and true light touch approach that has enabled the United States to lead in the digital era. Just last week, Vice President Vance spoke in Paris about the great potential of AI and the importance of American leadership in this new technology. I'm glad that the Trump administration is committed to American leadership in AI, and the Commerce Department will have a critical role to play in balancing accountability with AI's great possibilities. Mr. President, the job of the Commerce Secretary touches just about every industry in this country. And behind all those industries are Americans working hard to provide for their families, live their American dream, and make their contribution to America's future. Howard Lutnick understands this, and I'm confident that he will work every day to help American commerce thrive so that the American people can thrive. Mr. President, America has tremendous potential. I look forward to working with President Trump and with Howard Lutnick to continue to unlock it.
Schumer attacked President Trump's agenda and program cuts by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency.
This week will mark 1 month since Donald Trump was sworn in as president. In this first month, Donald Trump has waged a scorched earth campaign against the rule of law and against the very system of checks and balances that kept America together for 2.5 centuries. Why? Why are they doing this? Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the Republicans are doing it all for one simple goal. They're trying to give their billionaire buddies a tax break and have you, the American people, pay the cost. This week, Senate Republicans will take the next major step to achieving Donald Trump's agenda here on the Senate floor. Senate Democrats will expose Republicans' reconciliation budget bill for exactly what it is, a sinister front for clearing the way to cut taxes for Donald Trump's billionaire friends. This is going to be a long, drawn-out fight. This reconciliation budget bill is only the first step, albeit an important one. Democrats are glad to have this debate with the Republicans. We will show the hollowness of Republicans' arguments on cutting waste. We will expose Republican attempts to cut health care, to cut Medicaid, to cut housing, to cut NIH, to empower DOGE, so it incinerates basic services that help tens of millions of people. Also, Republicans can help their billionaire buddies with another tax break. Of course, Republicans will deny all this and try to change the subject, just like when Donald Trump tries to change the subject by talking about the Gulf of Mexico or hotels in Gaza or annexing Canada. These are all distractions, so people don't see the Republicans' real goal. And what is that goal? It's worth repeating again and again and again, and we will. Donald Trump and Republicans are trying to give their billionaires a tax break and have you pay the cost. They can do it in 1 bill, they can do it in 2 bills, they can do it in 50 bills. It doesn't matter. This end game is exactly the same. Tax cuts for billionaires paid for on the backs of working and middle-class Americans. In fact, everything we have seen so far in Donald Trump's presidency has been about rigging the game for the billionaire class. From firing independent government watchdogs to illegally freezing trillions for veterans care and Head Start and community health centers, to giving Elon Musk American Social Security numbers and even potentially private tax and health records, to defying court orders, to demonizing judges. Everything Donald Trump has done so far is meant to dismantle the rule of law so that billionaires can run the show in Donald Trump's America. If you don't believe me, Elon Musk is already holding court in the Oval Office and meeting one-on-one with heads of state. All the while, DOGE is taking a meat axe to health care and education and aviation safety and so many other services. without thinking about the consequences for American families and for America. DOJ talks on and on about cutting wasteful spending, but look what's actually happening. FAA workers who keep our skies safe are being fired in droves even as accidents increase. Apparently, DOJ thinks that's government waste. The VA, meanwhile, has fired over 1,000 staffers, including people who manage the Veterans Crisis Line. Apparently, DOJ thinks that's government waste. The FDA under Robert Kennedy Jr. is firing staffers who keep our food safe and review medical devices. Apparently, again, DOJ thinks that is government waste. No one else does. They do. Donald Trump and DOJ even tried to fire hundreds of staffers who safeguard America's nuclear stockpiles. Imagine firing people who guard our nuclear stockpile, all to help their billionaire buddies with another tax cut. Can you believe how dangerous and foolish this is? Donald Trump and Elon Musk were willing to risk the safety of America, all in the name of tax cuts. This example shows clear as day that DOJ doesn't actually care about increasing efficiency. DOJ is simply taking a meat axe at government in defiance of the law and without thinking of the consequences, all so that Donald Trump and Republicans can give their billionaire buddies a big tax break. I want to close on a particularly profane example of how Donald Trump and DOJ are taking a meat axe to public services, the 9/11 Survivor Health Program. I would have thought that some things would have been out of bound for Donald Trump and DOJ, like axing services to 9/11 families. Sadly, I was wrong. Because last week, Donald Trump slashed the workforce for the World Trade Center Health Program, which I helped create years ago to support our 9/11 first responders, survivors, and families. Apparently, serving 9/11 families, those who have been hurt by 9/11, who have lost loved ones in 9/11, is just more wasteful spending in the eyes of Donald Trump and DOJ. It's utterly disgusting. Because of these barbaric cuts, 9/11 families, including sick first responders and survivors, will now face longer wait times to receive often desperately needed care. Families worry more about whether or not their loved ones will be able to afford life-saving treatment. Donald Trump and DOJ's decision to cut funding for the heroes of 9/11 is outrageous, it's un-American, it's insulting to every 9/11 first responder, survivor, and family. So today, I sent a letter with Senator Gillibrand to Secretary Kennedy, urging him to immediately reverse the cuts that impacted the World Trade Center Health Program. Donald Trump, Secretary Kennedy, and DOJ have betrayed our sacred promise to never, never forget. And what's the point of these cruel cuts? So Donald Trump and DOJ can give their billionaire buddies a tax break and have the 9/11 families pay the cost.
Thanks for listening to this FedNet podcast, and be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited.